Hello, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope you're well. I hope you and your families enjoyed a happy and a healthy Pesach with one another. Shabbos is going to be upon us soon, and I wanted to share with you a Dvar Torah for Parshas Shemini. Inevitably, whenever Layla and I spend Yom Tov together, a conversation about our parents, our grandparents, and our family's history will always come up. And one point will always become clear is that Layla and I we come from very different family backgrounds. My family was fortunate enough to have made it to America and Canada at the turn of the 20th century. Came over at about the year 1900. Layla's family's got a very different story, though. All four of her grandparents survived the hell of Auschwitz, and her family, those that survived and made it to the United States, only came after World War II. And in the course of a conversation, what will always come up is that growing up as a child in Cleveland, I never really encountered Holocaust survivors in a very close, meaningful way. Yes, there were some in shul, there were some in the community, but they just weren't part of my immediate family. That all changed when I was married. Layla's two grandmothers were still living. At this point, she just has one grandmother left. And they were always at her home, whether it was for Yom Tovim, it was for Shabbosos every so often. And they would sit at the head of the table with the numbers tattooed on their arms, and they would very willingly share with us their stories of what they remembered from the home and what they remembered from the old country and their traditions, their Masorah, what they had gotten from their parents and from their communities. And I think it's really appropriate to stop and think about our Holocaust survivors that we're still fortunate to have in our midst, specifically this week at Parshas Shemini, because I think there's a very, very close link to them. And let me explain what I mean. While there's so many reasons that our remaining Holocaust survivors deserve the most respect that we can possibly give them, I want to share with you two specific reasons why we need to really value the remaining Holocaust survivors that we have in our midst. Number one, our Holocaust survivors remind us just how strong a human being is capable of being. We're all going to read Parshas Shemini this Shabbos, and towards the beginning of the Parsha, we read about how at the height of the celebration of the inauguration of the Mishkan, two of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, they unfortunately perished while they were bringing an Eish Zara, some type of a korban, some type of offering that they were not instructed to bring in the Mishkan. How did Aaron immediately respond? The pasuk tells us, Vayidom Aaron, that Aaron was silent. Aaron understood that there was still important work that he needed to be part of, and now was not the right time to mourn for his dear children. Somehow or another, Aaron found the superhuman strength to keep his emotions in check and to continue with the task at hand until the proper time to mourn would arrive. That's incredible. We just can't believe how Aaron found the strength to do that. How could someone who was just dealt such a devastating blow find that power, find that strength, that self-control to focus, to go on, and to stay on the track with the crucial task that was at hand and that demanded his attention? We think to ourselves, what human could possibly have that type of strength? But when we interact with our Holocaust survivors, we listen to their stories, we study their lives, we realize just how strong human beings are capable of being. Those precious Jews, those survivors, they saw their worlds torn apart. Their families were butchered before their eyes, and all that they knew and they loved was taken from them in a world that had gone mad. Yet somehow or another, they found the strength to survive and then to rebuild their lives. They came to new shores, whether it was America, whether it was Canada, whether it was Israel, and they acquired new skills. They found the courage to rebuild their families, learn new languages, rebuild their shuls, yeshivas, and their communities. Doing all that they did required strength that we may never have thought was humanly possible if we didn't know these people firsthand. Our precious Holocaust survivors teach us the superhuman strength wasn't limited to characters and to personalities that we find in Chumash and in Tanakh, but these are strengths, these are capabilities that every human being is capable of experiencing and living with, though we pray that it'll never be called upon and we'll never have to use such superhuman strength ourselves. There's a second reason why I think we really need to value and cherish our Holocaust survivors, is because they teach us how to put matters into perspective. At some point in the course of our lives, every single one of us is going to face failure, disappointment, adversity, and even tragedy sometimes. And we may think that our lots are so bad that we just can't imagine how can we possibly go on living? How could we carry the load that we have? But then we remember the Holocaust survivors who we've been so fortunate to interact with and to have had a place in our lives. We remember everything that they witnessed, everything that they suffered, all that they lost and they lived through, and then that they somehow found the strength to rebuild. Knowing their experiences allows us to gain perspective on whatever setback that we face in our lives. And some of them may truly be tragic. That perspective of understanding what they've been through, what they suffered, what they lost, and then what they rebuilt afterwards, that can give us the opportunity, and that could give us the strength that we need not to fall into a state of despair or hopelessness. And that also allows us to view our own setbacks as being ones that we can surely manage and find some way to deal with. I want to share with you an incredible story. There's a book out there that I think everyone should have in their libraries. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. It was written by Yafa Eliach. My mother-in-law was privileged to actually be in some of her classes. Yafa Eliach taught for years in Brooklyn College, in Brooklyn, New York. And my mother-in-law was privileged to have her as a professor in Holocaust studies. And my mother-in-law actually told me what the genesis of this book was. At some point in the 1960s, Professor Eliach told her students that every single one of you, not everyone, many of them, growing up, living in Brooklyn, attending Brooklyn College, had parents who had survived the Holocaust. And each and every one of them had incredible stories. Go home, interview them, write those stories. And this was an assignment that she had. And she says, let's share them and let's collect them, because these stories could give strength to every single one of us. First of all, it'll memorialize what they went through, but it also will change our lives if we can record them. And that's what many of the students did. And Professor Eliach herself, she recorded many stories in here. And what I found to be the most powerful in here were the firsthand accounts that she heard personally from the Bluzhever Rebbe and his Rebbetzin. Who was the Bluzhever Rebbe? His name was Rabbi Yisrael Spira. He lost his first wife and much of his family, his children, during the Holocaust, and he remarried afterwards and gave strength to so many survivors. He survived, and he gave strength to so many survivors who found themselves in New York after the Holocaust, and to so many Jews who were just trying to rebuild whatever they could, what had been lost. I want to share with you one brief account that Rabbi Spira has in his book, that Yafa Eliach recorded in her book that she had heard firsthand from Rabbi Spira. The name of this story is called I Envy You. And let me jump right in. Rabbi Shner Kotler, we know Rabbi Aaron Kotler was the one who founded the famous Lakewood Yeshiva. When Rabbi Aaron Kotler passed away in the 1960s, his son, Rabbi Shner Kotler, took over for him. Rabbi Shner passed away, I believe, in 1982. Prior to Rabbi Shner passing away, and he was only in his mid-60s at the time, he was a relatively young man. But prior to Rav Shner passing away in 1982, in 1979, he suffered another tragedy. He had a beloved son named Meir Kotler. Meir Kotler was a young man, about 26 years old. He was married and he had a child, and Meir passed away. The current Rosh Yeshiva in Lakewood is a brother of that Rav Meir. Rav Aryeh Malkiel Kotler is a younger brother of that Rav Meir who had passed away. And what Yafa Eliach records is an amazing story here, is that when Rav Shner Kotler was sitting Shiva for his beloved son Meir in 1979, one of the people who came to be Menachem Avel was the Bluzhever Rebbe. Rabbi Yisrael Spira came in from Brooklyn. And as she describes the scene, that when Rabbi Spira came into the house, Rav Shner Kotler was mourning in Lakewood, sitting Shiva. It was absolute silence. Nobody was talking. And Rav Shner was sitting there absolutely broken. And finally, Rabbi Spira, the Bluzhever Rebbe, decided that he was going to break the silence and he was going to begin the conversation. Let me read to you just two short paragraphs. So what happens? Rabbi Spira says and decides to speak. He says, I envy you, Reb Shner. Your son passed away, yet he left a young wife and child to carry on his name. You know the place where your son is buried. God blessed you with other children, and so many people are coming to comfort you in your sorrow. I had one daughter whose face brightened the world, a son-in-law who was the most promising young scholar, and a grandchild, the delight of my heart. Then came the Holocaust. I don't even know the day they were murdered. or the sight of their graves, or if they have one at all. No one came to comfort me because we were all being murdered. How can I not envy you? It is said that sorrow shared is sorrow halved. The way we say that in Hebrew, you'll always find this in the Sfarim, is saras rabim chatzi nachama. Knowing that other people are suffering, somehow or another, that provides some degree of comfort to one who's going through terrible times. So Rabbi Spira continues, so many people, rabbis, students, friends, neighbors, have come to share your sorrow. You must be comforted. I beg of you, please be strong, for in a strange way, you are privileged. A few days later, after the Shiva, Rabbi Shneur Kotler called the Rabbi Bluzhov and thanked him for giving him so much courage and strength to overcome the most difficult days of his life. And Yaf Aliyah concludes by saying, I heard this at the house of the Grand Rabbi of Bluzhov, Rabbi Yisrael Spira, April 26, 1979. And here it is, that's what she's sharing with us. She's sharing with us that this idea that the Holocaust survivors, one of the gifts that they were able to give our world is to show us the strength that we can achieve and the ability to put our own setbacks, no matter how tragic they may be, into proper perspective. I think this is something to think about as Parshas Shemini as we read it this Shabbos, but also this coming week. So many Jews around the world are going to recognize Yom HaShoah, and that's a chance for us to think about those who perished, but also those who survived and those who rebuilt, those who showed the strength of Aaron, that Vayidom Aaron, that they put their own tragedy on hold because they realized there was a task at hand. And each and every one of us who are privileged to live in a world where there's so much Yiddishkeit, there's so much Judaism, there are shuls, there are yeshivas, we have Holocaust survivors to thank for that. They found the strength of Vayidom Aaron to rebuild. But number two, we have to thank them for showing us how to put things in perspective and deal with our own setbacks that we experience, as real as they may be. We need to keep them in perspective, and that allows us, by the fact that we've encountered and we've had relationships with survivors, that allows us to gain these two aspects of understanding Vayidom Aaron is possible. It's not just for characters and figures in the Chumash and Tanakh, but number two, that it's possible to rebuild, possible to march on, and it allows us to put our own setbacks into perspective. And for that, we always need to show our hakaras hatov, our appreciation for those tzaddikim and tzidkanios, those righteous survivors who have come before us. And sadly, they're dwindling in numbers, but we need to hold on to those who we still are privileged to have in our midst and to let them know how much we appreciate them. I hope each and every one of you enjoys a good Shabbos, a restful Shabbos filled with health.